I remember sitting with a brother, a good friend of mine, who was also part of Al-Itqan, the Mutqin Hifdh program. And I remember we were sitting together in my old Volkswagen, very broken up car, and he was sitting there trying to not get the glue that I had used to stick up the panel in the interior on his arm, basically. The sad thing with this brother was how overwhelming life had gotten for him. And I genuinely have never seen anything like this before. Often when we're growing up and taught about mental health, especially my generation, we don't realize how impactful it is on our life and how much it can change the way we are productive, how we are energized to do things. This brother was so capable. He was very intelligent, but with the small things, it just became too difficult for him to do. And that meant the easy things were the things that he only did. He would stay in bed all day, be on his phone for 14 hours of the day. And that, of course, like anybody else, meant that he wasn't able to do the things that he needed to do. I would often ask him after work, so this is about 6 p.m., 7 p.m., and he would respond to me. I would ask him, "Can you come outside? Let's go and do something together." And he would often tell me that, "Oh, I just woke up." And that meant that, for example, he would be spending all day in bed, not eating, not doing any type of work except for the work that he had to do to keep his, keep the money coming into his bank. Even salawat, for example, he would often miss them off just because of how burdensome it was for him to get out of bed, the mental fatigue that he was facing. For anyone who's experienced mental health issues, you can probably be sympathetic to this. For those that haven't experienced this, we ask Allah that you don't have to go through this. But the reality is, we're not often far away from this kind of reality. A lot of us are already on this path, but without realizing it, we're just a bit further behind than this brother was. Which is why it's so important for us as Muslims and people who want to memorize the Quran, who have to balance so many responsibilities, to be aware of things that are weighing us down. And it's so important for us to realize how we can be happy with memorizing the Quran. How do we actually enjoy it rather than it be a sense of hardship, a sense of uh, like something that's weighing you down instead? You see, this brother, despite his shortcomings and despite the difficulties that he was going through, was still able to memorize a lot of Quran, a significant portion of Quran. Allahumma barik. You see, the problem for this brother and the majority of other brothers that I've conversed with and given advice on the Quran, the big problem becomes, how do you manage the guilt? Because of course the Quran is a very emotional thing, and if anyone who studied psychology, you'll see that when a person's emotions are tied to a form of productivity, and I was doing a lot of research, for example, on professions which are very emotional. Example, teachers, they often suffer from a lot of burnout because their professions are literally raising the next generation of people, basically, and that has a big impact on the way you perceive your work. Failing in, for example, a simple admin job is a lot different from failing a generation of people, right? And these emotions that we carry, the guilt that we feel, is so prominent when it comes to the Quran. We're spiritually guilty when it comes to the Quran. And perhaps it is needed sometimes. You do need to feel that guilt to be able to start off the activation phase for creating the habit. Being able to start memorizing the Quran, revising the Quran, there needs to be a feeling of guilt. And there's many examples from the pious, from the Salihin, where they've used that guilt for good. But for a person to constantly rely on guilt, to guilt themselves, to shame themselves constantly for years, it becomes very detrimental to their mental health. And it becomes something that is antithetical for your Quran journey, for your Quran memorization. You can't rely on guilt for 2, 3 years and memorize the way you want to. You will eventually burn out. You see, here's what I see very, very often. A brother will be, will feel guilty. They are trying to memorize the Quran. They want to achieve excellence. They're balancing so many different things. Example, work, family responsibilities. These are things that everyone has to go through in life. But when it comes to the Quran, they also feel guilty. And I've seen, for example, someone say to me, I haven't memorized or touched the Quran in 20 years because of, how much things I've had to do for the dunya. And that's not me bashing the person. This is just the reality of what they were going through. And you see, when the brother or a brother feels distant from the Quran, the guilt, of course, brings them back. And that's a good thing. And I'm not trying to bash that form of guilt in the sense that you need something to bring you and to wake you up. And often, uh, the ulama, they give advice that when a person is in a certain state, it's often the best type of advice is to give them the opposite of what they need, of what they're going through. Sorry. If a person is happy, it's often good to remind them of why it's important to be solemn, to be reflectful. Sorry. But you see, with these same type of brothers that are going through all of these responsibilities, something happens in life, right? Your kid will get sick, you have a deadline at work, things happen. And because of that, you eventually will fall off with the Quran. But the guilt that you feel in that moment, it can't be the only thing that brings you back to the Quran. Because over years and a long time of doing this, it becomes something that makes the Quran burdensome. You don't associate the Quran with the type of thing that you should be associating the Quran with, relief. You associate it instead with pain, with suffering, with a heavy burden, basically. Now, why have I focused on guilt so much? And this is based off of a lot of research in the psychological world, or the neuroscientific world. Uh, Especially where there has been a very strong connection between those who suffer from guilt and those who suffer from burnout or depression as well. Actually, a group of researchers studied 370 anesthesiologists, sorry. And why do we focus on, or why did they focus on anesthesiologists? Because anesthesiologists, compared to other medicinal type of jobs, they are far more likely to experience burnout and depression. They are at least 40% likely. 40% of people, if I'm wrong, correct me. Well, that was from a quick preliminary research of mine. But this is a place where people very quickly burn out, because obviously they are seeing traumatic things. They are seeing things that are going to make them feel emotional. And often when they feel like they haven't done enough, they feel guilty. And these psychologists, these researchers, when they were going through and testing this specific cohort of anesthesiologists, they found two types of people, two profiles. Profile one were those who were who were not burnt out. Sorry, they were those who were tired, who were just cynical about the job. They didn't want to do it. They were just there because there was a paycheck that they needed to do. It was the thing that they were, life had given them, and they were just about cruising through. Profile two, on the other hand, was profile one with guilt as well. So people who were like profile one, cynical, who were just cruising through the job, but they also felt guilty about the fact that they weren't doing enough. Now, you see, this is exactly where it gets really, really striking. This is very, very telling about the human brain. You see, those in profile two, those who were going through the same things as profile one, but just with the added thing of guilt, faced double the scores of the profile people in profile one. They had double the likelihood of falling into depression. They were far more likely to use alcohol and abuse it. They were far more likely to use tobacco in a very dangerous way. You see, the guilt in this instance didn't help them to recover or to become better at their jobs. It just forced them to collapse. You see, guilt doesn't fix the problem inside of you. It doesn't make you a better person. It actually accelerates the decline. It accelerates the burnout and the depression that is, coming for you, basically because of how busy you are, how how much you've neglected yourself. So, it's been a long time actually discussing what not to do with the Quran. What do you actually want to do with the Quran? How do we enjoy it, and why is it important to enjoy it? I'll give you another example of a psychologist who did research into what sustains a person's behavior. In the 1990s, a psychologist called Barbara Fredrickson was studying a group of people, and she created a theory off of the back of this study called broaden and build theory. So you see, Barbara, she took a group of people and she split them into two sections again. One group watched clips or video clips that made them feel joy, made them feel contentment. And the other group, they watched video clips that made them angry, that made them fearful. And she also had a separate group that would watch neutral videos that didn't create any type of emotions. And obviously, you can tell that those who watched the video clips of joy and contentment were far more likely to actually be positive. But it doesn't just end there. The people that felt good when they were asked what they would like to do had very, very long lists. They had so many things that they were excited to do. They were more energetic in the way they approached life. Whereas those who were fearful, who were angry, they would often shut off. They had far fewer things that they wanted to do. And of course, they weren't as energetic as those who were feeling positive emotions. You see, emotions are something that scientists say come through evolution. And of course, you know, there are some things of that we can accept as Muslims and some things that we can't. But they say that the positive emotions come from the ability to create communal bonds, uh, to be energetic and do things. The negative emotions, come from the body avoiding certain things in emergencies. If, for example, a person is on the brink of death, the negative emotion is there to quickly get you out of it. But the thing is, you can't rely on negative emotions to keep you constantly going through life. You need the positive emotions. You need to feel happy about certain things. And that's just a reality for the majority of people. And this is so important for the Quran, and nobody talks about this. The relationship between your emotions and your connection with the Quran is so paramount. And you'll see a lot of the time when brothers are have left off the Quran for so long, they may leave it off for a day or two, which is fine in the long term. You're not gonna, completely forget the Quran if you leave it off for a few days. But the guilt that you feel is the thing that just weighs you even more down. And you'll see very quickly where that gets you. You're so guilty, you actually don't even want to come to the Quran. You stay away from it, you avoid it, and you may not realize it. You may not actually be, cognizant of this fact. But when it comes to the Quran, you are actively, you find it difficult. There's a heavy burden. You feel like something is weighing you down to open the Quran. And it makes sense on a common sense level, right? If every time you open the Quran or the Mus'haf, sorry, you feel dread, you feel fear, you feel anger at yourself, are you going to want to do that more often? Are you going to, design your life around this? Are you going to feel motivated to do that? Of course not. So how can a person actually enjoy the Quran? And I want to bring a very early memory of mine when it comes to the Quran. This is one of my first ever memories of the Quran. With when I was about 5 years old, I remember I was sitting in my childhood flat, and I was waiting for my dad to come home. I was told by my mum to read the Quran, and I was sitting in my parents' bedroom, which was at the end of a very, very long corridor. It was a very long corridor, and obviously that corridor was the a space of very fond memories of mine, pretending that I was riding horses and whatnot from TV. Different story. But when my dad was coming home, I remember I was not reading. I didn't read. And my dad, I heard the key go into the front door, and as soon as I heard the key, I was saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And as my dad is coming in, he hears me reciting as loud as I can Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and he asked me, and he's laughing, "Were you reciting Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim the whole time?" And of course, as many 5-year-olds do, I was trying to avoid it. I was saying, "No, no, I was reading," and then eventually I told him, "No, I wasn't reading." And then he asked me why, and I said it wasn't fun. I don't like reading. And then he said, "Let's make it fun then." And he basically envisioned that I was, performing in that sense. Like he used the word singing. Of course, we're not trying to sing the Quran, and he didn't mean it like that. But what he was saying was that you should enjoy the Quran. It's melodious. It has a feeling of serenity when you read it. And a very quick thing that I got from my dad was to pretend that I was, Sudais leading, the Haram in Mecca, to be pretending that I was, uh, you know, an imam basically. And you see this a lot amongst children if you have ever taught children or have children yourself, that you'll see that they very quickly associate things in a playful manner. Example, I was teaching a kid and I was, reciting, telling him to repeat after me. And he was saying to me, "Oh, Ustad, you sound like an imam." And I was laughing, of course. But the thing is, we lose this as adults. We lose this playful feeling when it comes to the Quran. As children, we find a way to make the monotonous acts fun. We find a way to study hard if our parents make us do it. And we eventually entertain ourselves. But somewhere, and perhaps this is a video for another day, we lose our childhood, we lose ourselves, and we prevent ourselves from having fun. We prevent ourselves from enjoying the things that are good for us. And one thing that when I started to become a lot more consistent and also helped other brothers become more consistent with the Quran, I realized that the way you actually enjoy it is to be, someone else, basically, to pretend to be someone else. And for example, when I'm revising the Quran, I like to pretend that I'm, in a Quran competition where I have to make no mistakes, get the tajweed properly correct. You probably see it on, YouTube, where you see these, young Qurra who are there being asked a random ayah by, very, very senior Qurra, and they get no mistakes and they recite perfectly. Now, in my own time, I pretend that I'm in that situation. It's fun. It makes it a game, basically, to revise the Quran. And even, for example, being able to uh, sit down and recite the Quran itself is an enjoyable thing. To listen to the Quran, to be able to ponder over it, and we'll get to the pondering thing a bit later on. That's another way you can enjoy the Quran. But specifically, being able to enjoy the sound, the melody of the Quran. If you don't know the Arabic, uh, of course, you should be pursuing and trying your hardest to be able to understand the Quran, but just being able to, and you'll see many non-Muslims, many non-Arabs are able to enjoy the Quran. This is a miracle of the Quran. So really try and enjoy it. Don't think that, for example, you've memorized 10 juz, 20 juz. You need to revise 5 juz. And of course, numbers are important. Being able to be on top of it is important, but it's more important that you stay consistent, right? Because if you leave off the Quran forever, it's more dangerous and more detrimental for a person than to do that. Than, for example, to uh, you know do a little bit at a time. What's fun, what's easy for you, and build upon that slowly but surely. And if you think about times where brothers are the most excited about the Quran, like Ramadan, for example, there's often a very fun element around the Quran. It's not monotone. It's not something that you have to do. You're not forced to do it, nor do you feel guilty about not doing it. In Ramadan, for example, you're often talking about your favorite Qurra. You're going to Taraweeh every day, you're commenting about how this Qari recites very well. And, you are motivated because of that to go and do the Quran yourself. Of course, the conversation about your iman being high is one thing, but we don't recognize the fact that we've made it something fun, something that we can play and enjoy. And there's many studies that you can view on this, but I don't want to keep going into the studies. I want you to be able to just be able to take the words for what it is, enjoy the Quran, be able to play with it. Basically, one thing that I'm often told by elder Muslims who have many responsibilities is that their time for the Quran is gone now. They're not children anymore. But they fail to realize that 40-year-olds or 30-year-olds have, even 50-year-olds, not to discriminate on 60-year-olds. But you have a superpower that children that are in the madrasa system, memorizing the same thing every single day, you have a superpower over these people. Sure, it's easier to memorize when you're younger in the sense that you can repeat something very many times and it gets into your head a lot quicker. But it's not, and I really challenge this, it's not as easy. You probably find it easier as a 40-year-old to memorize the Quran. And that might be something that you may contest, but I'll prove it. You don't have the same ability as a 12-year-old to repeat and get it into your head the same way. But what you do have over the 12-year-old is to memorize in a different way. You have more rich experiences. You have greater experience of life, greater stories that you can recall. And the Quran is something that you can attach these stories to. And remember, the Quran is something that needs to be experienced, not repeated. And often you'll see children who have memorized by repeating codex. For a child that doesn't know Arabic, the Quran is a bunch of lines in a mysterious language that they don't understand. These same children, when they grow up and they, go into the world of adulthood, they forget the Quran because they never, and of course, unless they do this, they never associate the Quran with experience, with stories of their own life, understanding it and relating to the Quran. The Quran is not just a book, it's something to be lived. And of course, Aisha radiallahu anha explains that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's khuluq, his mannerisms were like the Quran. It was like he was a walking, talking Quran. There was a Russian man who was a journalist named Shereshevsky, and this is in the 20th century in Moscow. He was a journalist, and he would often go into meetings without taking notes. He wouldn't need to take notes. And his boss was, very worried about this and asked him, "Why are you not taking notes? You're going to forget, and you're going to, lose, revenue for our company, basically." And Shereshevsky said to his boss, "I don't need notes. I've memorized it basically," and he recalls everything from the top of his head. When his boss became worried about, his mental state, basically, he was worried that something was wrong with him. He sent him to a psychologist, and what the psychologist found was that Cheryshev was able to remember many things from years back, everything basically. And what he would do was he would experience the the stats, the figures, the things that he was told. He would experience everything. It became, for example, that a number became something with colors, with sense of smell and different things, basically. The problem with Shereshevsky, though, was that because he had so many things in his memory, because he was able to remember everything, he couldn't understand what they conceptually meant. His brain was overwhelmed, basically. And example, the difference between an adult and a child. The child can keep many things in their brain, but they don't understand them conceptually. With Shereshevsky, for example, if you were to say, there was an Iron Curtain, the famous Winston Churchill speech describing the split between Soviet Europe, communist Europe, and the capitalist Europe, this journalist wouldn't have been able to tell you what that meant. He would genuinely visualize a curtain made of iron, if that makes sense. So the same thing happens with the Quran. A child is not able to conceptually understand the Quran. And it's not as embedded, and they may be able to, for example, recall and say Qul huwallahu ahad a million times better than a person who's memorized it when they're 60 years old. The problem here is that they don't actually understand what it means. They don't conceptually realize what that means for their life. Also, by understanding conceptually, you are able to enjoy the Quran a lot more. أفلا يتدبرون القرآن أم على قلوب أقفالها? Why do they not ponder over the Quran, Allah asks, or are their hearts locked off? Going back to Shereshevsky, for example, he was able to remember many things, but he wasn't able to have a normal conversation. He wasn't able to understand some of the words that were being said to him because he would literally, be distracted by different words that were coming at him. In the same sense, you have a superpower, an ability to enjoy the Quran far more in your adulthood than a child. And don't take that lightly. You have the ability to memorize at a far better rate in that specific scenario. And I've seen, for example, adults who struggle with memorizing through repetition by repeating ayat very quickly memorize the same ayat when they understand what they mean, when they are able to conceptually put it in a place in their brain. You have experience and expertise in certain things. You may be an expert in your job, in your career. You are, able to have knowledge on certain things in this life. You can now connect these things with the Quran and have the Quran embedded in your life as well. So let me give you three pieces of advice before we leave, and before you click off this YouTube video. The first thing that you need to do is to not associate the Quran with something that you need to be guilty about. Associate something fun with it instead. Have a routine that incorporates play, for example, with your children. And before people take me out of context, I'm not saying to go and play around with the Quran. I'm simply saying find a way to make it enjoyable. Make, for example, a routine to listen to your favorite reciter and really, take into account what the sounds are saying, what the rhythm is basically. Not to associate, for example, the Quran with music, of course not. But Allah has made the Quran, with tartil, with certain, uh, eloquence, with a certain eloquence that you can't find anywhere else, and that in itself is something to be able to enjoy, and most people will enjoy it like that. The second thing is to strive to understand the Quran, strive to be able to ponder over its ma'ani, over its meaning. And the third thing, try and end every single session that you have with a win. The big thing when it comes to emotions is to feel like you're going somewhere. Often with burnout, or when someone leaves off the Quran very quickly, they feel like their efforts are not being registered. It's like hitting a spoon at a brick wall. You need to switch the frame of how you understand the Quran. Very often we hear and we have mashayikh giving us advice when it comes to the Quran. Uh, and sometimes you have to understand that you are not mashayikh. You are not ulama who have spent years training yourself in a specific discipline. You need to understand your level and be able to build from that. Perhaps you are able to memorize one line a day, and that in itself is something to be celebrated. Do not diminish it. And when you do diminish it, you are only shooting yourself in the foot, because later on down the line, you'll say, what's the point of me memorizing a line of day? It's nothing. But if you had done that line every single day for 15 years, you would have been a hafiz. And think back to 15 years ago when you were a lot younger. If you had only started then, where would you be now? Don't diminish the small wins. Don't think that it's not enough. Don't think that you need to do, of course, push yourself as much as you can, but don't diminish your actions. Be proud of what you can do. And that in itself will make something, will give you that dopamine hit, will give you that motivation to come back to the Quran, because it is something that you can accomplish rather than something that is weighing you down and making you feel guilty. Now, of course, the thing with memorizing the Quran is if a person can be consistent for years, they can do the same thing every single year, they will be able to memorize the Quran very quickly or within a certain limit of time. The problem is that most people aren't able to stay consistent because life gets in the way. You have responsibilities, you have things you need to do. I've actually started a 90-day program, which by the end of it, you'll be able to stay consistent with the Quran by yourself. We've engineered every single thing that will prevent you from memorizing the Quran, and engineered also the opposite of that, being able to create the habit of the Quran. If you're interested, check out the link in the bio, inshallah. It's specifically for brothers who are balancing multiple responsibilities such as your career, your family life, and needing to be able to have that kind of accountability. I hope this video has been of benefit nonetheless, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan.